I'm so excited for our conversation today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, happy to be here. Happy to be here.
Annie and I are super excited to have you with us today to talk about kind of moving beyond the typical way we think about fundraiser strength and getting campaign readiness right in 2026. We have so many goodies available for you today in terms of like research insights that we've been doing on the Practivated side. And then I'm just going to like tease this. We have a campaign readiness scorecard tool that we're going to be giving out ungated to everybody on the call today. So we really are focused on making this super applicable to you immediately. And so I'll introduce myself, then Annie will introduce herself, and then we'll like get into it. So my name is Mallory Erickson. I should maybe say first and foremost, like I'm a fundraiser. I became an accidental fundraiser first as a managing director, then executive director. I have been a coach and consultant in this space since 2020. I'm the host of What the Fundraising, the podcast, and have a book by the same name. And I'm also the founder of Practivated, which is the first ever fundraiser readiness platform where we really focus on training, coaching, growth, practice in order to enable fundraisers for the conversations that matter most. And I'm so excited to be with you today to share some of our insight that can be helpful for you in the work that you're doing with fundraisers during such a challenging time when it has never been more important to understand the difference between the skills we have and how those translate to showing up. Annie, you want to give a little intro to you and why you're here as well?
Yeah, I'm Annie Quade. I currently serve as the Associate Vice President of Strategy and Engagement for the University of Texas at El Paso. But I too am an accidental fundraiser, got my start in nonprofit with Children's Miracle Network hospitals, and have worked, it feels like almost every job in advancement. Currently, I have helped lead campaign strategy. I currently lead talent development and our integrated engagement team, and focus around like organizational effectiveness and how do we build healthy, high-performing fundraising teams. So I'm excited to be here. The other important thing is, I guess, I also am a customer of Practivated. We implemented Practivated at UTEP. Yeah, gosh, maybe 9 months, 6 to 9 months ago or so.
No, 12 years ago at this point, it
It
feels like all of our lives.
feels like, yeah, some days it feels like a minute ago, some days it feels like forever. So it's also been really exciting to sort of be along for the ride in this evolution of, how we leverage technology to really support our teams.
Amazing. Okay, so I know I haven't gotten everybody warmed up in the chat yet, but I would love to know because it's so important to us. This is a small group intentionally. We really focused on sort of who got invitations to this. But I'm curious for all of you, like on a scale of 1 to 10, when you start a campaign, like how confident do you feel that your fundraisers are set up for success in donor conversations? Like that space between the PDF creation and those moments where they're actually talking about the campaign. How do you feel starting either a campaign you're in now or one maybe you have coming up around the corner? Just sort of curious where folks are at. 6,
Six.
8, Steve, amazing.
Another six. All
Amazing.
right.
Okay. Well, you can keep letting those numbers come in. I know we're still getting to know each other. So, hi, Dale. I'm
Five.
so
Hey,
happy
Dave.
you're here. Oh my gosh. So keep letting those come in. There's no wrong answers. I think what we're going to be talking about today is like why is like this gap that has existed between all of the ways we've been sort of taught and historically done campaign readiness and then what fundraisers are actually experiencing and dealing with in those conversations that is continuing to kind of widen the gap between how they're able to be prepared material wise and how they're able to be prepared for those actual conversations and to be able to use their skills and knowledge effectively in conversations with donors. Annie, do you want to talk a little bit about the gaps that you've seen or the challenges that you have in terms of how we currently measure campaign readiness and why that to you feels like not enough?
Yeah, totally. So I've been a part of a couple of campaigns, pretty big scale ones as well. And I think it's awesome to see, we're kind of in the mid to higher end of the confidence level. And I think that's great. And that's a testament to the really great work that's already been done around campaigns. There's a lot of big firms that do a lot of really great work to look at feasibility, to look at readiness for organizations, which is huge. And I think having gone through that, a lot of it focuses in on data and donors and some of the infrastructure. And a gap that I noticed when I put on my talent development and my HR hat is what about the people? And so, I know we've got a big list here that we can share around some of the features that often get looked at when you go through a feasibility study or a readiness study, things like alignment and governance. Of course, case statements. A lot of time is spent on messaging. What are we fundraising for? And then the modeling and the gift pyramids and the wealth screenings. All of these things are sort of the tried and true factors of campaign readiness that I think come up a lot. And that if you're lucky, maybe they'll count FTEs and look at your org chart and say, yeah, looks like you maybe have enough fundraisers. Maybe you need another prospect researcher. But oftentimes that's the extent to which the people are considered when it comes to campaign readiness. So that's, I think, the biggest gap that I see is, okay, wonderful. We know we have the donors, we know we've got butts in seats, but is the team really fully ready to take on what a campaign will all fully entail?
Mm. I so appreciate that framing, and it's making me wonder, I don't know everybody of the 17 people who are with us today, how many of you are managers, how many of you are frontline fundraisers, but I am curious, like if you answered that question from a manager's perspective of how ready you feel about your fundraisers, I'm curious how ready you think your fundraisers feel themselves. Like when they're going into a campaign, do you feel like they are at like a 9 ready, or do you feel like they're like at a 3 ready and getting them started and warmed up and comfortable? Like take some time. I'm just curious. And if you are a fundraiser, you can answer for yourself too. But I'm curious how you think your fundraisers feel going into campaigns in terms of their level of readiness. And if you think there's any difference between how you feel about their readiness and how they feel about their readiness. So I'd just be super curious to hear that from folks, if you're willing to share. And we'll keep going, but I hope you'll answer me in the chat because I think that's something I hadn't considered before Annie was sharing that. And I was like, I also think there's likely a gap between like what we think and how they feel. So I think
Yeah.
that's a really interesting thing.
And it probably also depends if you've been through a campaign or
Yeah.
not, like what that team makeup looks like.
Yes, 100%. Right. If you are realizing before a campaign that all of a sudden you need to like make a bunch of new hires, like the folks who have been through a campaign or multiple campaigns with your institution are going to feel totally different. You're right. I'm asking people to give a singular rating to a very complex situation. So, I get it. Not clean data collection here by any means, but I think that's like something for us to think about is the relationship between like how we feel about kind of like organizational readiness and then how the fundraiser feels. And I would say some like signals of there being a gap there is that like kind of like slower or like more resistance fueled start for fundraisers. Everybody needs some warm up time. That is true. And there's different ways for warm up time to happen. I think in the campaign readiness scorecard that we're going to give you with some recommendations around practice at your institution, whether or not you have Practivated, our goal is that they're warming up before those donor meetings so that when you are starting that campaign, like everybody's readiness is at a much more advanced level than what I hear sometimes for folks. Yeah, super interesting, Mary, what you shared that the fundraisers might feel that 3, 4, where leadership is at like the 6, 7. I think that's really interesting insight. I need to think about that more. I'm literally like processing. I'm just thinking about this for the first time on the call. So here are some of the things we've heard in terms of the biggest campaign readiness gaps. I'm curious if these resonate for folks, if you feel like I'm missing something here, but I want to make sure in how we're talking about this today that we are like talking about it through the lens that you're thinking about it. So, and Annie, like maybe we go every other, like I'll do one, then you
Yeah.
do one. Okay. So the
Yeah.
first one is like that difference between material readiness and fundraiser readiness. And Mary, I'm even wondering if this is a little bit of the disconnect that you just named, which is like, we have all these beautiful like case statements and material. We've done all this material creation, all this structural work. But then what does that look like in terms of how fundraisers implement all of that in conversations and how confident they feel having the conversations about all of that work? So that's like the first one we hear a lot from folks. And you want to talk about the second one?
Yeah, so when we're thinking about like strengths and training, not necessarily predicting that conversation or that like that performance under pressure, I think campaign always creates added pressure. I mean, the point is to stir up momentum for donors and for dollars to come in, right? But that also, while that's creating um this momentum and this like reason to make a gift now is because of the campaign for donors, it's also putting pressure on the fundraisers. And I think that that's something that we don't often think about is, how to help them show up under that new pressure of the campaign deadlines, the new campaign goals, all of these things that are coming up. And so how do we make sure that as we transition into campaign, we're also preparing our team to feel like they have the additional resilience to go into those conversations?
Hmm. Yeah, I'll just piggyback on that to say, like, a lot of my coaching and consulting work over the last 5 years has really been focused on that relationship between how we feel and what we do, and what happens when we're in a stress state, and how that actually turns off in our brain a lot of our ability to use certain skills. We might be a great critical thinker when we're not stressed, but when we are stressed, and if we don't have ways to deal with that stress, we actually lose that skill in implementation. This is one of the things that inspired Annie and I wanting to come on and talk about this. Is we were just having a conversation, like kind of as friends, about this like space between, I had posted something about Strength Finder on LinkedIn, and I love Strength Finders, and I was like loving the comments, and then I was like, okay, but like what are the things that hold us back from actually being able to like realize those strengths, or utilize those strengths in real time? And that's one of the really hard things about stress and pressure, and some of the other things we experience in fundraising, is they actually throw us off from those strengths being able to show up in these moments that matter a lot, especially when stakes are high, etc. So just want to kind of
Yeah.
double click on that.
I
um
can throw
yeah.
myself under the bus too, Mallory, because I remember being a fundraiser in my very first fundraising job. We're in $1 billion campaign. We have all these big goals that we're trying to hit. And the first time that a donor asked me, well, like, what does the campaign even matter? Like, why do we do them? Why are you asking me to give right now? Like, and I stumbled hard in how to answer that question because I didn't know. I was brand new for that role, higher ed fundraising. I was still trying to figure it out myself. What is this thing? Why are we even doing it? Is it just
Yeah.
a marketing ploy? Like what?
Totally. And the thing I'll say is that there is for every fundraiser, whether you are in your first year or your 30th year, there is a conversation type that trips you up if you haven't been there before. And I will say we are hearing from so many like veteran fundraisers right now. Like, yes, I've had one type of conversation for 20 years. And you know what? Different things are coming up in donor conversations right now that I've never had to address before. I'm getting questions I never had to talk about before. And so there's always, especially right now in the climate that we're in, types of conversations or conversation moments that like have that option. And it's something I thought about a lot when I was first building Practivated, was like, inside Practivated, you can practice donor conversations, get feedback and coaching on these 16 different skills and indicators. I'm going to show you behind the scenes of that a little bit, because we use some of that to create your campaign readiness scorecard. But one of the things that's really important about that to me is like, yeah, you can say I'm a confident fundraiser, but like what happens when you pick up the phone and the donor says, how'd you get my phone number? Right? Like your confidence is not the same as it was when you were dialing the moment that is said. So how do you measure, prepare, support fundraiser confidence in the midst of all of these like, components of fundraising that are, throw us off,
Yeah.
understandably. So the other, because I want to get into the data, and I feel like Annie, you and I could just like gab about these four for the rest of the time. But I think one of the other big challenges that I, as a fundraising manager, and Annie, I'm sure you've experienced this, and please chime in, is like it's so hard to know how ready they actually are. I'm like super interested in that gap Mary identified between how leaders feel and how fundraisers feel, because I think that also sort of illuminates the fact is like, how well do we know that they are ready? Like, are fundraisers actually at a 3 or 4 in their readiness, or do they feel like they're at a 3 or 4 in our readiness? And we as managers and leaders haven't had good data to even be able to understand that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, right now, there's really nothing except perception and your judgment as a manager to be able to try and measure that.
Yeah.
Um, So lastly, messaging not being really conversation ready or very consistent. So this is another thing, building cases for support and having beautiful case statements and handouts and leave behinds, all of those are really great. And they're not always something that a fundraiser can easily translate into conversation. Again, I remember being a fundraiser in that $1 billion campaign, and we literally had a wall in our office that each had a folder for every single school, college, and unit. And each one of them had your case statement. And so before a meeting, I would pull up the paper and I would real quickly try to remember all of the priorities and reasons and messaging for insert random school or college here before I went into that meeting. Probably not the best way to prepare for a meeting, but that's what we could do at the time, right? So that's another just component that kind of creates this gap for fundraisers to really be ready to have a really successful campaign that I think we could think about differently in the future.
Yeah. And I sort of had a slide to show how much of that was also my life. Like I felt like I had, we're going to talk about like, we hear the term transferable skills all the time, right? And especially for those of you who are dealing with like hiring pipeline and annual giving and sometimes leadership giving, like you are constantly dealing with new fundraisers who, if they do really well, maybe are moving on to major gifts. If they don't like fundraising, you're constantly kind of bringing people into the fold, and you have to, in like I've been hearing from so many people, like we have to go with transferable skills. We don't have enough of a market here, and we don't have enough, like we can't fill all these positions without leaning on transferable skills, right? So we're finding people, we're finding, people with high EQs, like all these things, but those transferable skills are not the same thing as campaign readiness. And I think it's super important that we sort of identify this difference between like skills and readiness, because skills are what somebody has somewhere inside of them that needs to be activated. Readiness is how able they are to use those skills in moments and, despite stress or activation or a new thing being handled, like thrown their way. And so I think just a helpful framing for everybody as you're thinking about building towards campaign readiness is like, what are you doing to build the skills? 100% that's important. What are you doing to build the content and the structure? 100%. We're not downplaying that at all. But if you're seeing a gap between all of that and how you feel like the campaign is going or being executed or starting, that's where we're really seeing that like readiness gap come into play. Um, any questions about that? We'll keep going because I know sometimes it takes people a while to respond in the chat, but I know this for some people on this call might be a totally new concept, and I want to respect that and make sure I'm like kind of kicking myself that this wasn't like a meeting format where we could see people's faces and have an actual conversation. But if you have like questions or thoughts, like we do really want to create some space for conversation. And the last thing I'll say before we'll talk about some of the indicators, some of the research that we found, some of the different levers that you can pull to increase readiness. Again, whether or not you are on Practivated. One thing I wanted to say is my work and my book, What the Fundraising, focuses a lot on this relationship between fundraiser behavior and donor behavior. So I'm my background, I'm executive coach certified. I'm also certified in habit and behavior design from Dr. BJ Fogg over at Stanford, and trained in design thinking from the folks at IDEO. And one of the things that all of that work has really solidified for me is, any behavior that we take is a response behavior. Behavior is a response. It's responding to enough motivation, the ability to take an action, and being prompted to take an action. Everything we do in our life all day, every day relates to those things. Even if you had really wanted to come to this webinar, if we had not given you a link to do so, you would not be here, right? And so all of these things depend on motivation, ability, prompts coming together in a given moment. The thing that controls the majority of that happening when it comes to donor behavior is the fundraiser's behavior. How they're motivating or inspiring the donor, how they're unearthing their deepest point of alignment, how they're identifying where that transformational gift might come from, making sure that they're aligning ask with ability, but seeing curiously through discovery and qualification what might be possible if someone was to give their most generous gift. And so this is why I'm so relentlessly committed to talking about fundraiser behavior and have been for 5 years, because at the end of the day, all of the other stuff can only go so far. The donor behavior that we care that impacts so much of the revenue you're going to drive with the campaign relates to fundraiser behavior, and so much of fundraiser behavior is related to how they feel and their support and their readiness and their experience and their ability to go from skills to readiness. So I just wanted to kind of call that out as well. Okay. So I'm going to give you, because some of you might know a bit about Practivated. Some of you might be like, I keep hearing you use this word that is not really a word. And so, I don't know what you're talking about. So I'm going to give you just a super high level, because then I'm going to go into some data we found around these 16 indicators. But I just want to show you what it looks like so that it makes sense when I talk about the data. So inside Practivated, you can practice for donor conversations, specific donor avatars or personas that you create, or practice scenarios that you build that are like types of conversations. After you have each conversation, you are scored based on, there's two ways you're scored. Organizational specific scoring that could be like campaign messaging scoring, and Practivated scoring, which is based on these 16 indicators across 4 different areas of growth, all of which are scientifically proven to improve human connection and drive real fundraising results. So at the end of each donor simulation inside Practivated, you're given a screen where you're scored, and then Tivi is our coach inside the platform. She's an octopus, and so everything is very Tivi themed. That's why you see all of those like scoring results, and you can get coaching from Tivi around each of these indicators and what you could have said differently or what you could have done differently that would have improved your score and deepened that area of connection with the donor. So we're going to talk about what we saw when we analyzed 370 different conversations with fundraisers, where we saw the highest indicators, where we saw the lowest indicators, where we saw practice that improved indicators the most, and then what this means for what you double down on, invest on. We've highlighted 4 indicators, we'll talk about that in a minute, that we think for all of you to focus on are the most important. Annie, at a high level, is there anything else you want to say about the 16?
No, I think that covers it.
Okay, so we're thinking about readiness in 2 different ways, both like how do their skills materialize in the moments where they're having these conversations, and then the second way is around messaging readiness specific to your campaign. So I mentioned in Practivated, we have a way that you can also have a custom feedback page for any donor practice conversation, and so this allows this allows teams to be able to make sure that not only are they building donor trust, but they're talking about a campaign in the right way. They're explaining a program correctly. So they're able to get that dual readiness, right? Like the how they show up based on the realization of those skills in the moment, and then also their readiness around specific language and pieces like that. So we looked at the data sources for what I'm about to show you are looking at 370 different conversations across 106 fundraisers and these like 16 different indicators. And so it's super interesting. These are at the high level, just those 4 buckets all like fairly similar. But we can see, no surprise probably that relationship building is the highest indicator. And then, communication and delivery is right after that, fundraising specific skills following that, and strategic thinking following that. This is not surprising actually, because the things that are going to get the most thrown when you're in a high stress situation or you're asked that really hard question are likely more in that fundraising specific skill category and that strategic thinking category, because those are the parts of the brain that are turning off fast when your body's job is just to protect you, right? And sort of like keep you in that mode. And so this is part of why like the relationship building can withstand some of that, right? That's why I don't know if you like, I'm not a big meme person, but I looked specifically for a meme for this. This is why that connection between like being a natural and like what that means in the moment is so important to understand, because sure, they might be a natural relationship builder and that might be able to stick with them through a complicated meeting with a donor, but the other skills that you need them to show up with are not. They're dropping off in those moments. Annie, any like insights or takeaways for you on this before I go a layer deeper?
I think this just kind of reiterates and circles back to what we were talking about when it comes to, if you're hiring up for a campaign and you're increasing your staff size and stuff, absolutely, hiring for transferable skills is a really important skill set for anybody who's growing a team. Not only does it contribute to like diversity and equity and things of that sort, but it's really, really strong for building a team. And like this is where it's also the responsibility of the manager or the organization to also provide that like next level of support to help set those teammates up for success, because you can't just rely on that natural tendency or that like those innate skills. There is some more readiness that has to come to be able to make sure that people are set up to be successful.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And thank you, John. I love my spell checkers on these webinars because we look at these things all the time, a million times, and your brain just starts to like pass over them. Great way to know that AI did not create this, right? We did this all by ourselves. This is a deeper level of analysis around where we see conversations break down in more challenging donor conversations, or when kind of more specific actions are being or specific questions are being asked. Okay, so ask effectiveness, lowest result, right? We also really see a breakdown in structure, flow, and transitions, okay, which has a huge impact on a defined next step, on clarity around where the relationship is going, on being able to predict revenue numbers, insight gathering, which I think is super interesting. And there's a whole conversation we could have there around the impacts of this on qualification and discovery and really identifying that transformational gift. And then adaptability under pressure and relational depth. So I thought this one was super interesting, that what we saw was that the moment that a conversation got a fundraiser was thrown a hard question or got a little bit of pushback, we watched the relationship become more surface level, which means their skills around insight gathering, all those other things also became more kind of like shallow, because they stopped going as deep with the donor, went more on the defense, and they actually weren't driving that relationship forward in the same way. Annie, when you look at this, what are your kind of like big takeaways or ahas or, oh, that makes sense given what we've seen with X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of this kind of makes sense when you add in like all of that pressure and the complexity that happens with campaign, especially depending on the type of campaign. And I know we'll talk a little bit about Sprint and these other types of more innovative campaign models that are coming up. But when you think about like a large comprehensive campaign where anything and everything is part of the priorities, it makes sense that all of these components would struggle when put under the pressure or the objections of a donor. when they start to pick apart, well, like, what does this even mean? And like, why is that the priority now? All of those questions get a lot harder to answer, especially if you aren't prepared and you haven't had a chance to, try on different language for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And I mean, I think, as a fun, what I hear from managers all the time is like, how do we measure or how do we know that they really can gather meaningful insight instead of just making small talk, right? Or why is it that my like wealth screening tool is giving me one number and the fundraiser's telling me that the donor definitely can't do that? Like, did they really have a conversation that would like unearth that for us with clarity, right? And can they
Mhm.
navigate pushback without shutting down? Can they transition from rapport to the ask? That's like one of the things we hear the most is like, how do you transition in the meeting to going from that sort of like catch up relationship building? And this is why I said at the beginning, this is why practice is so, whether you call it a warm up, whether you call it a practice, whether you call it, whatever you want to title it, right? This is why it's so important across skill and experience levels because it isn't just about brand new fundraisers. As veteran fundraisers, we have certain ways that we've done these things for a long time, some of which that are working still, some of which are not continuing to work. And there are better ways of doing what a lot of us have been historically taught to do. And so there are still with, veteran fundraisers, relationships stalling and us leaving money on the table and all of those things. And this is where we see that breakdown actually happening on like, the readiness of their skills. That's the like big disconnect there. Um, the biggest thing that we saw when we analyzed kind of like donor sentiment and aptitude for giving across these indicators was that the biggest inability to secure gifts came from unstructured conversations and unclear asks. And I would say, I would add in here that the other indicators that we saw were about unearthing that like deepest point of alignment. But I think what's interesting about that is it wasn't that even in conversations where there was a no or where there was pushback or where that alignment, it didn't actually mean that there was no relationship connection, which I think speaks to a lot of what we hear from fundraisers. The conversation felt good. Why won't they respond to my email? Right? Or like, I think that went really well, but like, we don't have a clear next step and I'm not quite sure why. Or I'm having trouble getting another meeting with them, or, all of these things where we're like, oh, I think we have a good relationship, but I actually feel still really unclear around where it's going or what it might look like or what they care about. And so I think that that is just like kind of the perfect depiction of like, yes, they have these skills. Here's where they break down in terms of your campaign results. Um, and please continue to put questions in the chat if they come up throughout this. I would say the good news, if you're sitting here and you're like, okay, Mallory, it's a little bit of a gut punch. I would say the very good news is that actually these are teachable. I need a new word, but these are teachable skills in the moment. Like these are trainable muscle memory building skills to be able to realize them in the moment. And the skills themselves get stronger so that they can show up in those moments that matter most with repetition, feedback, and intentional focus. So I think that's been super exciting to see. And we can measure this in Practivated like we've never been able to measure this before. But I'm sure if you have this process in place in-person role play in your organization, the results would be very similar. So that's why this is not just about, I mean, practice, get feedback, warm up, build muscle memory, however you can. Because what we saw is that on a fundraiser second or third simulation, the score was about 5 points higher than their first immediate. I mean, this is immediate. They did one simulation. They got feedback from Tivi. They went back in and did the simulation again, and we saw an average increase of 5 points per rep. Okay. So that's a tremendous difference if you think about that on a 100-point scale and just how many reps it would take to get somebody into like an A. Annie, what are your like initial kind of thinking or thoughts around this?
I mean, I think people see this and they're like, well, of course, right? We all know this.
Yeah.
As fundraisers, if you've been in the game long enough, you probably went to, like for me, I went to one of those conferences where they forced you to do role playing in little groups of three so that you could practice what you needed to know. That's what it was. It was a Jerry Panis conference. It was great. Um, or you went and you did shadow trips, right? That was the other thing you did is you went on shadow visits with someone else to watch how they do it because a lot of fundraising you have to learn by doing. But I think the wonderful thing here is that ability to increase the reps. I was having a conversation even earlier today with someone about like, wow, it means you can just go and have 10 conversations, close your office door and just do it right there in your office. Yeah, before you'd have to, how long would it take for you to get 10 shadow visits before you felt like you had heard that enough or could try on that language. And so um, it just, allowing people to scale and to practice and to build that muscle memory sooner and quicker, that's huge. I wish I had this when I was a fundraiser.
Yeah. Yes. And I will say, like, I have met, once it doesn't happen too often, but I certainly have met organizations that have a role play structure that they have figured out and are getting a lot of value from. And I think that's amazing. Like, I also, like, as somebody who's neurodiverse, in-person role play has a whole other implication there. So, had plenty of challenges with that myself. But what I really want people to take away is that, like, real growth for these fundraisers, it comes from like iterative, situation specific practice and feedback, right? So that's
Yes.
the other thing I want to make sure is super clear. Like when people will say, like, and this is probably my own fault, right? But people will focus on the practice component of Practivated, and maybe it's the name, but like, yes, that piece is important, but it's not, we can also practice all the wrong things. Right.
Hmm.
And so the reason we made this campaign readiness scorecard, and maybe I'll just like drop it now in the chat and people can take a look at it if they want, is one of the reasons that we made this scorecard is to help you understand that it like really isn't just, maybe I'll show you two other slides and then I'll drop it so I don't distract everybody in the middle of this. Is that it's not just about giving them an environment to like build the muscle memory, but that you're connecting that environment to them getting feedback on things, because that's what's going to drive their growth. That's what's going to drive their readiness and their kind of like performance improvement there. So,
Hmm.
if you don't have an environment like Practivated, create rubrics for evaluation. We're going to give you one as a starting point. You can copy the template over. You can start to add in all your own things if you don't already have them, but create rubrics for evaluation, put fundraisers in groups. If you do have another AI tool, maybe use Copilot or something like that. It's not going to be exactly the same, but if you can record role play conversations on Zoom and then get some analysis of that role play that isn't biased by their peer or their manager, that can also be super helpful in like understanding where somebody's at against your rubric, right? And the rubric we're giving you is not exactly what you have on the back end of Practivated. I'm pretty sure like my team and investors would kill me, but we did take them what I believe to be the most important concepts that translate easily to in-person role play at a high level, and then you can build on that from there. So it's not an exact replica, but it gives you the same kind of like benchmarks, and then you can use that scorecard, put that into the generative AI tool you're using with the recording, see what it comes back with. Like that could be a way to really start to get that into play, and then ensure time for feedback and coaching. Like this is really important too, right? Like it's so important that people have time to then talk about certain scores, get the right coaching on those scores. Like that's what's going to actually build their confidence and their readiness. And like I mentioned at the very beginning, what we are giving you is a scorecard for this because I can't do this for you without knowing your campaign. But your feedback needs to have two components. It needs to have this conversation and connection readiness that I'm going to give you, and that you should edit for your institution. But then you also want to make sure that you're evaluating all of these role plays on campaign messaging readiness. So you want to have two components in your feedback. Anything you want to add to this piece, Annie?
Nope, that's 100% it. Yeah, it's how do you practice not only just like the general general best practices around fundraising, but then also that campaign piece of how do you pressure test some of the messaging, the case statements, the objections, the questions, pressure testing those so that your fundraisers and your team aren't caught off guard and they feel like they can go into those conversations with confidence.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Annie, do you want to talk about, and then we can actually all look at the campaign readiness scorecard together and y'all can ask me questions about it or clarification. But do you want to talk a little bit about kind of everything we've talked about so far? Like why does this micro campaign movement like make all of this even more important and sort of how you're thinking about that in terms of UTEP?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I think we're seeing these trends across the board in the industry around either their micro campaigns, their sprint campaigns, their specific fundraising initiatives. Lots of different institutions are starting to recognize that the comprehensive campaign um, model, sometimes it doesn't resonate as generations of donors are changing, things like that. There's a variety of reasons why. But I think one of the things that organizations and leadership teams need to consider as you think about implementing one of these campaign models is going to be the impact that that then has on your team. And again, that pressure, that messaging, the questions, those things that come up are going to be even more important if it's an even more specific campaign. I think Mary said earlier about, the anxiety lessening when it was like an all-in or a comprehensive campaign, right? When it's just like everything counts, we're just counting all the things. And that's great. And it can lessen some of that anxiety and that pressure for fundraisers. Or if you're in a role like me where you had to know everything about a little bit about every little place on campus, it made it really hard. But if you are thinking about even more specific campaigns or campaign priorities that shift with a particular cadence, you have to pressure test these even more. And so I think it's just another component where, as we see this trend changing in the industry, that organizations are going to need to think about what are the other components aside from wealth screenings and gift pyramids and things of that we can do to set our teams up to be really successful. And so I think that kind of just reiterates this whole thing of adding your team and your fundraiser readiness as a component to your campaign readiness and giving it some attention.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. And I'm rereading Mary's comment about that kind of all-in-one campaign too. And part of the reason that it creates so much anxiety to be doing all the new stuff is because they don't have the reps behind it, right? They want the all-in campaign because they're like, those are the conversations I've had the reps in around. Those are the ones I feel confident in because I've already had 20, 50, 100 conversations about it. Part of a practice routine like this that allows you to scale messaging readiness very quickly, right? There is actually a way for them to feel confident and clear around messaging readiness for a new campaign, but it does take some intentional time to give them those reps, right? And so I just want to sort of like highlight that because that makes perfect sense. We hear that all the time. And that's also why we're suggesting a framework like this, because you're not always going to be able to do a campaign all in. You still want people to be able to talk about these new programs or these new opportunities. And it's really hard to get comfortable with those things without having those conversations, like just from the materials that you're kind of putting together. Okay, so I'm going to share in the chat this Google Doc, and I hope, tell me if you cannot access that, and maybe my team can download it and also share it in an Excel for folks who might. No, I know it works, but just in case anybody doesn't use Google Docs, or because if you do use Google Docs, then you can just click use this template and it will copy it into your Google Docs folder, and then you can edit your own instance of it. But I'm thinking there might be some people that don't use Google Docs. And so if you don't, I want you to have an opportunity to have it just provided for you in the actual document itself. Brian or Giancarlo, can you drop the doc version in there too, or the Excel version in there too, so that folks can use that? So that's coming down moments away for you because I only have actually the template version. So I cannot do that for you right now. But what we have inside here is we prioritize. Here, I'll just show you this in case you don't have it yet in front of you. What we did in here was we prioritized the sections of our 16 indicators that we saw the biggest be the most important in terms of your fundraiser readiness. So that was structure, flow, and transitions, insight gathering, navigating tension and pushback, relational depth, and ask effectiveness. And then we also have at the bottom the campaign messaging readiness. We have a little piece of this, but I think for y'all, you're going to also want to create like a separate version that might be more explicit with like how people talked about certain elements of your campaign as well, similar to how we do that inside Practivated. And so you can add up the scoring here and then it'll add up at the bottom so that you can put in multiple reps around this. And the big thing I kind of want you to take away from this, the reason we gave this to you in this way and not a PDF is really so that you can edit it to make it work for you and that you can build on it and that you just have something like actionable that you can implement right away to help no matter where you're at in a campaign. Please let me know in the comments if you have a question about anything that you're seeing here or anything that doesn't make sense. You can also always reach out after today as well. Uh, Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. All the formulas are built out in the Google Doc to automatically tabulate in your score. My team is amazing. It was super important to us to help you all walk away today with a lot of value, for however you intend to implement, practice and skill building and readiness in your organization. The other thing I'll offer, because I don't see a ton of questions coming in the chat, is if you happen to be, if you are interested in learning a little bit more about Practivated, if you're like, okay, I want this, but actually we have no way of doing any of this without some of your support, I do want to invite you to learn more about Practivated as well. You can either, I think my team can drop a link in the chat if you want to just book a quick assessment call with somebody on our team. I also had a meeting get completely canceled today, like a 3-hour thing after this. So if you are like chomping at the bit and you're like, Mallory, I want to talk to you today. I'm hyped. Can we jump on a call in 10 minutes? I meant to be able to give you a meeting scheduler so that you could schedule time with me for the rest of the day today as well, but it isn't letting me do that yet because it's very kind to me and doesn't let anybody schedule anything that isn't more than 24 hours in advance. So let me fix that really quickly for you, and then I'll be able to share that with you, and folks can book time with me today if they want to talk about this. And I'm happy to just talk about it in terms of like how you can apply these things, answer any questions you have about how we do this inside the platform, learn a little bit more about the challenges that you are up against. No pressure either way. It's always really important to us that you can use our tools and strategies outside of our platform, but we also know that a lot of folks have challenges being able to implement some of this just for capacity reasons and managers not being able to meet with every fundraiser for 30 minutes before demo meetings or before donor meetings and wanting their team to really have that kind of like on demand immediate support, or you're trying to scale messaging readiness very quickly because you're like, Mallory, I needed to have this conversation 2 months ago. And so now I have 40 fundraisers who need to get campaign messaging ready real quick. That is, we can really help with that sort of like at scale. Annie, do you see any questions coming in? I want to make sure that we are answering anybody's questions, but it's looking quiet on my end.
It is looking quiet here too.
Okay. Anyone, if you want to put anything in the chat, feel free to do that. And we'll just like I have other questions I can ask Annie during the rest of our time. Maybe you're too busy booking time with me later today, which I would be so happy to see you. I would be so happy to see you later today. Please tell me if that didn't work, by the way. I'm wondering if I still, oh no, Oh, it didn't work. Okay, DM me if you would like. Just DM me right now, or you can shoot me. I don't know why this is not working for me at the moment, but it looks like it's giving people one option, which feels very intense. Unless all the other ones are already gone. So you can DM me if you're like, okay, I really would like some time with you to talk about this today, and we can find a way to do that for the rest of the day today. Or again, grab that assessment link, book time with our team a little bit later today, and you can do that as well if you want to learn a little bit more and see if it's a good fit given your needs. Annie, anything else like through our conversation today or that we've talked about that you feel like would be helpful for folks as they're thinking about implementing the scorecard on their team and just thinking about next steps?
I think the only thing with is like as I think about this whole conversation and the scorecard, I can imagine myself back in that managing fundraiser role and being like, oh my gosh, now this is like another thing I need to add to my list, and it can feel like a lot, right? And I think I would just say, this is something that you could ask your team to do with each other, even. It doesn't always have to be exactly coming from you down as the manager. Sometimes just having peer-to-peer feedback, sometimes they can give each other feedback in a different way than you can. And so that's another, just like give yourself some grace with this. And um yeah, there's lots of different ways that you can approach it.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, please, I'm seeing if I have one new message. Do other orgs integrate Activated? Yes. So the thing that I'll answer, and yes, you can ask me any questions about Proactivated. Maybe somebody on my team can help me figure out how to make this meeting thing work so that I can focus on answering the questions here. But yes, we don't actually integrate with any tools, and we don't need to. So it's a completely independent system. And where people really see the biggest results in performance are through these kind of custom programs and scenarios that we build around donor avatars and personas. So there's no identifiable donor information going into our system, even though we have the most secure system you could imagine, but we are a completely isolated system. So we don't connect to a CRM. We aren't pulling in any of your donor data or anything like that. So people are using it kind of side by side, and you can set up portfolios inside Proactivated, again, not with identifiable donor information, but if you wanted, all of your fundraisers to maybe have the same persona group, or you want some fundraisers to practice with certain types of personas and others to practice with different types of personas, or you want them to set up kind of a custom avatar that is really similar to a specific upcoming donor meeting, they can do that as well. And then role play, and it gets eerily similar to that upcoming donor meeting, but again, without identifiable donor information, because that is not what's necessary in creating the real feeling of the donor conversations.
Mhm.
And yes, protect my background is in like with fundraising AI, and as a co-founder of Fundraising AI, which is all about the responsible and beneficial use of AI in fundraising. And so I built this for folks inside my coaching and consulting practice first, not thinking it would become its own tech company, but I wanted this for my fundraisers because I wanted more leading indicators on how they were doing. I wanted more clarity on the skills and readiness that I needed to focus on and support as a coach and a consultant. I wanted insight into all of these things. And so I built it for me. And then there was so much interest from the sector that it spun out into its own company. But these are private, safe environments for fundraisers. Managers get high level analytics on top skills, biggest challenge and growth areas. A fundraiser can share a feedback page with their manager. And we see that all the time to support going deeper in one-on-ones and to talk specifically about upcoming donor meetings and strategy and stuff like that. but it really sort of like accelerates the learning curve. UTEP, when it came to onboarding, reported like a 280% increase in improvement in onboarding time. And so there's a lot of different qualification and discovery improvements, as I mentioned before. So there's a lot of different use cases for this, and happy to talk to anyone around it. Please let us know if you have any other questions in the chat as well. I do not think my team is fixing my link situation. So if you are interested, just use that other link to find time with, which I also don't think has been shared yet. Brian, could you drop oh, there it is in a weird link. I always don't get the way all the links change every time you copy and paste them into different places. But I just sent it again if folks want to find 15 minutes with someone from our team to learn a little bit more about that. And I would love to hear, for those of you who use the scorecard that we shared, I would love to hear and learn your insights, what you feel like is missing from that. We're going to continue to like build on that, just like public open source resource for the community. So would love, love, love to hear the way that you use that and how it could be more helpful for you as well. Okay, amazing, everyone. Well, I do not mind giving fundraising managers 4 minutes back. So grateful to get to talk about all of this with all of you and wishing you all a great rest of your day.
Thanks, y'all.